existence. Why starts off from the dwelling in the mind, in the plantation in the mind. It's a fantasy of freedom in the mind. You might earn a green thumb. Now help your neighbor out. It's not just about. Too many folks is already gone dust. Dead in a body still here on foot. Too many folks already flung fail. Too many of these POS is already gone sale. Too many of these, I said too many of these POS is already gone sale. Walking out, seal talk, a lot of guys, just fraud. What type of crimes on the county site? All of that is applicable by the code. A lot of fails, a lot of flunks, a lot of dopes, a lot of drunks, a lot sitting around, talk about sports. That's how you go for about 30 years. Voting sure. 30 years. Voting sure.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome. Today we're looking at pricing on purpose, creating and capturing value. If you're interested in participating in the capitalist economy, then this one is for you. So let's get right into it. And let's see. This one. Let's get this going here and ready to shit. Here we go. Now we're ready to go. Beautiful. Okay, so pricing on purpose. Let's get right to it. We're going to skip ahead a bit in this book here and get right to the chapter we want to get into here. And that's the 3 types of intellectual capital. So that's going to be the topic for this stream. Just checking to see if anyone is there. If you guys or anyone in the stream, please make sure you hit the like so I know that we're here, or hit a little something in chat so I know we're streaming to the interwebs. And let's get this thing rolling. Let's see, live chat, and it looks like we are streaming. Okay, is anyone else out there? Just give me an affirmative in the chat and we can start. Wait and see if I see anything in the chat here. All right, cool. Here we go. See, make sure we're actually making it out there to the real world so I'm not speaking to dead air. Okay, here we go. The three types of intellectual capital. The wealth creating ability of intangible assets over physical assets is indisputable as we move from capital-based enterprises to knowledge-based enterprises. So we're going back a bit here, but we're going to look at an excellent example of yesteryear. And this is American Airlines Sabre Reservations and Information System. If you guys recall, the travel agents would use the Sabre as the reservation and information system. On October 11th, 1996, AMR Corporation, the parent company of American Airlines, sold, as an equity carve-out, 18% of its Sabre subsidiary in an initial public offering that valued Sabre at $3.3 billion. So let's think about this here for a second. It's an equity carve-out of 18% of $3.3 billion. But on the previous day, AMR had a total market value, including Sabre, of about $6.5 billion. It's almost half. Thus, a reservation system generating income from travel agents and other users of its services constituted half of the market value of AMR, equaling the value of the world's second largest airline, owning 650 airplanes in 1996 and other physical and financial assets, including valuable landing rights. A $40 million research and development investment in Sabre during the 1960s and 1970s mushroomed into a market value of $3.3 billion in the mid-1990s. By October 30th, 1999, Sabre's share in the total market value of AMR increased to 60%, demonstrating the value creation potential, the scalability of intangibles relative to that of intangibles. Oh, should be tangibles here. It looks like a typo. Well, that's why we're reading it like this. So did you get this? The value creation potential, the scalability of intangibles relative to that of, it should say here, tangibles. While the airplanes American Airlines owns show up on its balance sheet, Sabre was nowhere to be found. Interesting, huh? 50%, 60% of its value. A teacher once asked Yogi Berra, "Don't you know anything?" And he said, "I don't even suspect anything." GAAP's deficiencies in measuring intellectual capital notwithstanding, for our purposes, we are going to separate a company's IC intellectual capital into three categories, as originally proposed by Carl Eric Svaby, a leading thinker in knowledge theory in 1989. So these are going to be our three categories we're going to explore. If anyone else is here, go ahead and ask any questions to interject in the chat, and we can always go further or deeper if I pass by any abbreviations or anything that you don't know. And let's start with these three categories of intellectual capital I see. Human capital, structural capital, and social capital, which social capital is defined here as customers, suppliers, networks, referral sources, alumni, joint venture, alliances, etc. That's a pretty long list. Did you ever consider all of these things of a business as having a value of intellectual capital in the category of social capital? Interesting concepts here. All right, let's proceed. We will explore each of these in greater detail in the third book, but we're not going to go through the third book of the Intellectual Capitalism series. Meanwhile, the crucial point to understand at this juncture is that the interplay among the three types, this is the in-between play of the three types of intellectual capital above, that generates wealth creating opportunities for your company. Human capital, for example, can grow in two ways. Two ways that you can grow human capital. When the business utilizes more of what each person knows through training, right? And when people know more things that are useful to the firm and or its customers' discoveries. And since knowledge is a non-rival good, meaning we can both possess it at the same time, knowledge shared is knowledge that is effectively doubled throughout the organization. See this? A lot of people think of knowledge as their little personal fiefdom to privilege of profit in a business. But knowledge shared is knowledge that is effectively doubled throughout the organization. An interesting recursive and generative concept here, doubled throughout the organization. That is why former Hewlett-Packard CEO Lou Platt said, "If HP knew what HP knows, we would be 3 times as profitable." I once heard something just as an offshoot here in marketing. It's like, in the old days, the marketers would say, half of what we do works. We just don't know which half. Yes, of course, and always good to see all of you here. I appreciate everyone attending these types of book reviews here, because the knowledge that I've just kind of pulled through here in somewhat of a boutique fashion for our audience is the kind of stuff that's going to help us expand our liberties, I believe. Let's continue. Since knowledge can be found almost anywhere, and it does not have to be newly created, as we're watching right here, it is critical that we incorporate social capital into our company's intellectual capital, because defining our knowledge solely by our human and structural capital is too inward looking. Defining our knowledge solely by our human and structural capital is too inward looking. Social capital is outward looking. The boundaries of a business do not just keep knowledge in, they keep it out as well. The boundaries, like a membrane. Expanding our definition of intellectual capital to the social environment within which a company operates gives us many more opportunities to leverage our knowledge. It's interesting here to expanding our definition of intellectual capital, which is what we're doing today, to the social environment within which a company operates. So it's an environment the company operates, but it's a social environment. Gives us many more opportunities to leverage our knowledge. And think about it, you're leveraging your knowledge, and knowledge is doubled when it shares. You're leveraging something that's being doubled throughout the company. Value increases geometrically then, right? This is why British Petroleum gives a Thief of the Year award to the person who has stolen the best ideas. Oh, shit. And Texas Instruments has a not invented here, but I did it anyway award for ideas taken inside or outside the company. Wow. Knowledge companies constantly celebrate learning, not just the application of knowledge to the services it offers its customers. Wow. Knowledge companies constantly celebrate learning, not just the application of knowledge to the services it offers its customers. You see this? Constantly celebrate learning. And we're all knowledge companies today, whether we like it or not. Knowledge companies have to do much more than merely extracting 8 hours of work from their human capital. They have to leverage their minds as well. This requires a different level of thinking and a totally different set of metrics to measure the effectiveness of organizational learning. Most knowledge is created and owned by people, and thus resides in the human capital of any organization. Converting human capital into structural capital is one of the major roles of a Chief Knowledge Officer, a CKO. John Peace, former CKO for Ernst & Young, summed up his knowledge mission this way. Give me a second here. Make sure everything's running smooth on the OBS end. And anyone else in the chat has anything else to add here? Just make sure everything's going good. Looks like the stream's moving fine. All right, here's John Peets says, for us, knowledge management is critical. He's a chief knowledge officer, right? Knowledge management. What is that? It's one of our 4 core processes. It's a process of knowledge management. Sell work, do work, manage people, and manage knowledge. As Thomas Stewart further explained, in his self-written job description, Peace outlined 3 responsibilities for a CKO, a Chief Knowledge Officer. Evangelizing about the value of sharing knowledge, running and backing projects that find, publish, and distribute knowledge around the firm, and managing a staff of about 200 people, mostly in the firm's Center for Business Knowledge in Cleveland, and a firm-wide infrastructure of websites. Stewart, 2001. Yeah, this is something that's very important in any successful organization. I can say from firsthand experience that knowledge management is necessary for any business to really grow to a point where it can be profitable enough to be acquired or otherwise found to be useful to integrate into a larger structure. An important aspect I would also point out here, what they mentioned here too, running and backing projects and distributing knowledge, which are things that are done, which I was able to do, which they say here, through a firm-wide infrastructure of essentially websites, but in 2001, perhaps that's what you call them, but they're within an infrastructure of a company. Very important role. And if you think you're going to have a successful company that has a lot of knowledge in its basis without having it managed in a sense, come on, get over here. There we go. Yeah, the CKO is a Chief Knowledge Officer. But this is a very important role in a knowledge-based business. Let's go back to what he mentions here. I love his self-written. This is something everybody else should think about here. If you got to work a job, at least it be a self-written job description. Be authentic if you're going to be corporate. And Pete's seems to have that well understood. And again, evangelizing about the value of sharing knowledge, which is what we're trying to do here. You want to co-create with knowledge, not hoard it. And that's by running and backing projects that find, publish, and distribute the knowledge around the firm. And then, of course, managing a staff of about 200 people. That's his little gig going there, so he can get paid his millions. But there is one thing here. We sell work and we do work, right? As a business. You manage people, but when do they ever talk about knowledge managers? There's always managers over the workers. We need to have managers over the knowledge if we want to have all 4 core processes that are critical for a knowledge management company or role for that matter. So that sums it up pretty good. Thanks there, Disciple of the Messiah, because that's a critical thing we need to have for our notes. So make sure your number 7 Esquire pencil and a notepad or photogenic audio memory. I have serious reservations about managing people, especially since we are talking about knowledge workers, whom I firmly believe cannot be managed in the traditional sense. Nonetheless, the essential role of a CKO is to capture the knowledge that exists within the minds of the people who work in the firm. As Ikujiro Nonaka and Hirotaka Takeuchi point out in their book, The Knowledge Creating Company, how Japanese companies create the dynamics of innovation. The individual is the creator of knowledge, and the organization is the amplifier of knowledge. So the individual is a creator, and the organization amplifies the creation. That makes sense. As we saw before, how can you amplify the knowledge? By distributing it effectively throughout the organization, as Pete is pointing out here. Right? It's running and backing projects that find, publish, and distribute knowledge around the firm. Because we know as we spread it, it doubles, effectively doubles. So let's continue down this path here. This is no easy task, since we must draw a distinction, back to what we were discussing in the last stream about Cassira and the distinctions between symbolic systems to make it an effective equilibrium between them to prevent conflict in the real world. So this distinction between explicit and tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge can be documented and kept somewhere, in a manual, a filing cabinet, a website, intranet, and so on. That's explicit knowledge. This type of knowledge usually comprises a company's structural capital. Tacit knowledge is a different animal. Tacit, in Latin, means to be silent or secret. This is why it's so hard to explain how to ride a bike, swim, describe Marilyn Monroe's face, or play golf like Tiger Woods. You could read all of the explicit knowledge in books by Tiger, for instance, on how to play better golf, but until you actually did it, your understanding would be severely limited. Explicit and tacit knowledge complement each other, because in Latin, explicit means to unfold, to be open, to arrange, to explain. Germans say Fingerspitzengefühl, a feeling in the fingertips, which is similar to tacit knowledge. Let's see, it's Fingerspitzengefühl. I like that word. I wish I knew how to say it properly. If anyone wants to give that one a shot. Germans say Fingerspitzengefühl, a feeling in the fingertips, which is similar to tacit knowledge. Another useful way to think about the difference is that information can be digitized, while knowledge is intrinsic to humans. Think about that. Information can be digitized, but knowledge is intrinsic to humans, so it's within us. You could also say that information is random and miscellaneous, while knowledge is cumulative and orderly. It is usually a totally different experience to read an author's book than it is to have a chance to talk to him about it. The latter will give you a much richer contextual feel for the explicit knowledge documented in the book, and in some cases may even be more valuable, which I must say from my own firsthand experience as well, that has been the case. Actually meeting a really great author, actually, Ralph Nader. Face to Face gave me more valuable information than reading his books, what he told me. And you start to see more about the why of the what, which takes you into a deeper understanding of the knowledge. Okay, or consider the difference between reading a customer report and talking with the customer in person. Think of that. The difference between reading a customer report and talking with the customer in person. That's a big difference. Think of it even like writing a police report or making a face-to-face statement. Is there a difference? How often do companies take the time to mentor their colleagues on the importance of learning and sharing knowledge? He's learning me all his experience, as Yogi Berra said about Bill Dickey. No doubt this gets done in more organizations, but it is on an ad hoc and as needed basis, rather than a systematized, measured part of the performance criteria of team members. A systematized, measured part of the performance criteria of team members. There is simply no mechanism in most companies to reward continuous learning, the sharing of tacit knowledge with peers, or externalizing tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge by writing an after-action review, a report borrowed from the U.S. Army, which will be discussed in the next book on Indiana, the Intellectual Capital, in Chapter 21 on various corporate functions. We won't be getting into that tonight. So let's look at this for a second here. And this is something that, again, from firsthand experience, I've seen the value in doing this. That when you have not just a reward for continuous learning, but the sharing of tacit knowledge. This is when you have on-the-job training, as we might say. But then you want to externalize tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge by writing an after-action review, which comes into procedure writing, which is another duty that I performed, which was externalizing. I called it, making quantifying quantifying the subjective is the major challenge of doing that. Okay, make sure stream's all good. Yeah, please hit the like, guys, and just don't hit that spitzen. Yeah, that's a great word. We gotta see that word again. Fingerspitzen Giffel. Spitzengiffel. Fingerspitzengiffel. Fingerspitzengiffel. It doesn't quite fit on the screen there. Let me read that out. So we have tacit is Latin to be silent. That is to stop or to close. Silent, implied, but not expressed. Tacit consent by silence or not interposing an objection. So tacit consent by silence, I guess that could also be acquiescence. There's a variety of that. Very good. So thank you, disciple there. So we have want to make sure we have our definitions clear, but tacit knowledge is, like I said, it's like if you show somebody how to do something and they can show, but that becomes what I also call tribal knowledge. And that means that it's not made into explicit knowledge that can be easily passed if there's not someone there to, continue that training along to effectively pass the torch. So at some point, someone should have the task of externalizing the tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge by writing it down. And an after-action review is one method of doing it. That's a report borrowed from the U.S. Army. So we can look into field manuals of this, which I could pull up too, because there are some older ones which are clearly public information at this point. And this is a long deprecated manual I'm sure this came from, so we should be able to obtain this at a later time. So let's continue here. Because most companies are so caught up in efficiency and productivity quotas and working on their income statements, they are not building their invisible balance sheet. This is the beauty here, of which the primary asset is the knowledge that exists in the firm. Yet capturing this type of knowledge would be incredibly valuable to the company in terms of leveraging and the ability to delegate as a way to increase the structural capital, just in case certain human capital investors decide not to return to work. I don't think that needs much further elaboration. Let's continue. Negative intellectual capital. Before we leave this important topic of intellectual capital, it is necessary to explain something that may, at first impression, not seem obvious. When intellectual capital is discussed, it is normally done in a very positive context because most of the examples used are from successes in leveraging intellectual capital, such as Microsoft or the Sabre reservation system. Naturally, not all research and development projects or new products are successful, and in fact, the failure rate is astonishingly high. Most new drugs fail, as do most consumer products and books published. Investments in intangibles contain much higher levels of risk and more uncertainty than in tangible assets. If my software product fails, those costs are usually gone for good, unless I can somehow leverage the knowledge I gained into another attempt. This is the second form of potential gain from a venture. In addition to profits, the epistemological profit, meaning an advancement of knowledge. See this? So it's not a failure of a product. If my software product fails, those costs are usually gone for good unless I can somehow leverage the knowledge I gained into another attempt. And this is called a second form of potential gain from a venture. So if you can leverage that knowledge, you can get a second form of potential gain, another chance, in addition to profits, called the epistemological profit, meaning an advancement of knowledge. On the other hand, if I purchase an office building or a mall and it fails, at least I can recover a portion of my investment. Perhaps. Well, yeah, you could. But that is not the main point to make here and now. What is important here is there is such a thing as negative human capital, negative structural capital, and negative social capital. Certainly, this sounds counterintuitive, but it nonetheless is true. Well, as long as the second attempt takes into account that knowledge that you gained, that potential, right? So we call that an epistemological profit. If you can somehow leverage and recover that, what was the term they used here? If you can leverage the knowledge you gain into another attempt, right? That's what it is. That's the epistemological profit. So take notes on that one. That's a good one. If anyone says you failed, no, I was actually creating an epistemological profit. You see, it's on the invisible balance sheet. It could be considered a test run in some instances, perhaps. If it's a project that's being managed as a knowledge worker, as a chief knowledge officer, you would say the first run is a test run, and on each test run we do, we'll accumulate an epistemological profit. See, each test run. So each failure isn't a failure. You're building a potential gain from each venture by your advancement of knowledge in the form of an epistemological profit. Sounds good for the investors, at least. Let's continue. Not everything we know is beneficial. Think of the intellectual capital a thief possesses. It is not knowledge in the sense he knows how to perform his craft just as much as United Airlines knows how to fly planes and transport people around the world. The intellectual capital a thief possesses. But that does not make the knowledge valuable with respect to thieves. The social loss they impose is a societal negative. So since it's social capital, it's considered negative social capital. All right, let's continue this. This is great. This is really good now. Think of countries that dogmatically adhere to the principles of socialism or Marxism, even though both of these theories of social organizations have been repudiated by empirical evidence. There has been enormous negative social capital built up over the past 5, 6, 7 decades in Castro's Cuba, just as there was in the former Soviet Union. As the latter struggles to make its transition into a free market economy, as we see right now, still, these negative legacies are being felt. Lack of a secure private property rights, no effective system of jurisprudence to adjudicate disputes, no efficient banking and credit system, or other institutions necessary for economic growth. When President Ronald Reagan was asked what he thought of the Berlin Wall during a visit to Germany, he gestured at the wall and said succinctly, "It's as ugly as the idea behind it." Examples of negative intellectual capital in an organization would include a rigid adherence to old methods that are hindering your people from achieving their potential. High on this list would include cost-plus pricing, industrial age efficiency metrics, focusing on activities and costs rather than results and value, focusing on activities and costs like government rather than results and value, and other forms of negative intellectual capital that have embedded themselves into the culture, which is supposed to be the process for advancing our personal liberties. These negative ideas have been leveraged throughout each type of knowledge discussed herein: human, structural, and certainly social, and have become part of our tacit and explicit knowledge systems. The negative ideas. Let's review these negative ideas that are hindering your people from achieving their potential. High on the list is cost-plus pricing. If we want to get into this, we could also detail this because that's also in this book. Industrial age efficiency metrics, which we are pretty familiar with, right? Focusing on activities, right? And cost, the negative aspects, rather than positive results like results in value, performance, right? And other forms of negative intellectual capital that have embedded themselves into the culture. It's terrible. These negative ideas have been leveraged throughout each type of knowledge discussed herein and have become part of our tacit and explicit knowledge systems. It means they've creeped into our laws when you say the explicit, and policies. One of the duties of this book is to point out how these legacy systems are indeed negative forms of intellectual capital and need to be replaced in the knowledge company of the future. Throughout history, the physical fallacy was an idea that reigned supreme, that is, the notion that wealth is embedded in physical, tangible assets. Economists now have a far better understanding of how wealth is created from the free minds operating in free markets. Economists now have a far better understanding of how wealth is created from free minds operating in free markets. This can be seen by observing various developing economies escaping the shackles of poverty creating wealth and a better standard of living for their populations. It is now clear that wealth resides in the minds, and economists have proven this at the macro level of economic organization. What is needed now is to apply these same ideas at the micro level, at our levels of the business entity, by positing a new theory for the intellectual capital company of the future. And we'll leave it at this for tonight. But we have a great quote here from Karl Popper. A theory that cannot be refuted is not scientific. Great. Hang on a second. Again, one more second here. Get the super bot. Report them out there too. Okay. All right. Everyone still there? Making sure I'm not being doxxed. So this next chapter is really good. I don't want to go on too long on this because we're almost at the 45-minute mark. But let's look at this really quick because I want you to look at this. Analyzing the predominant business equation. So in Greek language, analyze means cut into pieces, which we will proceed to do with this theory before positing a better theory. When you think about the traditional theory of an enterprise, you would no doubt construct a model similar to this. Now, we've all seen this basic one here, right? Revenue equals capacity times efficiency times cost plus price. So let's see what that is. Since this model dominates the thinking of business leaders to this day, it is worth explaining the model in greater detail to understand both its strength and, as will be increasingly detailed, its fundamental weaknesses. Consider a professional service firm such as accounting, legal, architecture, engineering, consulting, or advertising. The archetypal pyramid firm model rested on the foundation of leveraging people power, in effect, their capacity, right? Most people, that's your capacity. The theory is, since the two main drivers of profitability are leverage, the number of team members per owner, and the hourly rate realization, a form of cost plus pricing. See what we're doing here? We're taking the number of members times an hourly rate realization. That's called a cost plus pricing. So that's our baseline of our costs. That's our human cost. We have a material cost, and then we have our marketing costs, whatever, business expenses, and then you have your profit. If each partner could oversee a group of professionals, this would provide the firm with additional capacity to generate top-line revenue and thus add to the profitability and size of the firm. If a firm wanted to add to its base revenue, it had two primary choices. It could work its people more hours, or it could hire more people. It is no secret which choice the average firm tends to do, much to the chagrin of its already overworked team members. In most firms, the partners wait until demand is bursting at the seams before they add more professionals. We've seen this over and over again. I want to get on to the second theory here, just so you can see a comparison. I don't want to get too lost in this because this can go on for a long time. And we have some great stuff in here, but for the purpose of this stream, we want to look at the new business equation. Models and theories exist to guide managerial judgment, not replace it. Managerial judgment, not replace it, to guide it. All right, so the old equation is no longer relevant to the drivers of success in the business of the future. My favorite guy, Buckminster Fuller, designer, cosmologist, philosopher, mathematician, and architect. He designed the geodesic dome. Once said, guys, you've heard this quote before. Here it is one more time. You can't change anything by fighting or resisting it. You change something by making it obsolete through superior methods. It's time to replace the old equation described in the previous chapter with the new model. All right, you guys paying attention. Take out your number 7 Esquire pen. Take notes. Profitability, that's our positive, equals intellectual capital times a price times effectiveness. Let's explore each component of the above equation. Then we will discuss why it is a better theory for explaining the success of companies in operating in today's marketplace. We start with profitability rather than revenue, because we are not interested in growth merely for the sake of growth. As many companies around the world have learned, some the hard way, such as airlines, retailers, and automobile manufacturers, market share is not the open sesame to more profitability. Get that? Market share is not the way to get to more profitability. We are interested in finding the right customer at the right price, consistent with our vision and mission, even if that means frequently turning away customers. Did you get this? We are interested in finding the right customer at the right price, consistent with our vision and mission, and even if it means frequently turning away customers. I've coined a corollary to Gresham's law. Bad money drives out good. We've heard that before. Bad money drives out good. From monetary economics, affectionately known as Baker's law. This is going to be Baker's the author of this. Bad customers drive out good customers. How about that, guys? Write this one down too. Bad customers drive out good customers. You got to fire the bad customers. I heard one successful business owner tell me that if you keep the bad customers around, they take up 90% of your time. Adopting this belief means you need to become much more selective about who you do business with. Even though that marginal business may be profitable by conventional accounting standards, very often the most important costs and benefits, for that matter, do not ever show up on a profit and loss statement. Accepting customers who are not a good fit for your firm, either because of their personality or the nature of their work involved, has many deleterious effects, such as negatively affecting team member morale and committing fixed capacity to customers who do not value your offerings. Big one right there. We all still there in the on the stream? We had a quick attack by the robots, so I just want to make sure that we're still streaming good. All right. This is why the new equation focuses on profitability, not simply gross revenue. Remember, we don't want to have growth for growth's sake. We want to have growth for increasing profitability. When it comes to customers, less is usually more. As pointed out in Chapter 3, for our purposes in this book, intellectual capital is composed of 3 primary components. So this is a great recap, and this is probably going to be where we're going to end it tonight. 1, human capital. This comprises your team members and associates who either work for you or with you. As one industry leader said, this is the capital that leaves in the elevator at night. The important thing to remember about human capital is that it cannot be owned, only contracted, since it is completely volitional. So there's people are there volunteering to be employees. You cannot own them or compel them to work. In fact, more and more, knowledge workers own the means of your company's production. And knowledge workers will invest their human capital in those organizations that pay a decent return on investment, both economic and psychological. In the final analysis, your people are not assets. They deserve more respect than a copier machine and a computer. They are not resources to be harvested from the land like timber when you run out. Ultimately, they are volunteers, and it is totally up to them whether or not they get back in the elevator the following morning. Structural capital, number 2. This is everything that remains in your company once the human capital has stepped into the elevator, such as databases, customer lists, systems, procedures, intranets, manuals, files, technology, and all of the explicit knowledge tools you utilize in order to produce results for your customers. And then third, social capital. Let's pay attention to this. This includes your customers, the main reason a business exists. But it also includes your suppliers, vendors, networks, referral sources, alumni, joint venture and alliance partners, and reputation. Now, this could be in the form of things like reviews online, your reputation. Of the 3 types of intellectual capital, this is perhaps the most overlooked and least leveraged, and yet it is highly valued by customers. Wealth does not exist in tangible resources such as timber, land, real estate, oil, and so forth, but in ideas and their creative expression. Now pay attention. Is everyone still here? I want to make sure we still got people here for this part because this is a really great line. All right. Anyone throw something in the chat if we still get audio? All right. I'm just going to keep going anyways here. Yes, thank you. All right. This is great. Oil was completely useless. In fact, if you were a farmer, it was an absolute nuisance until the combustion engine was invented. If it were not for the piston engine and the electricity needs of the industrialized world, the Middle East, which has been sitting on oil for thousands of years, would be nothing more than sand dunes, rocks, and caves. To reiterate, there are 4 P's of marketing: price, product, place, and promotion. Of these, price is the most complex component of the 4 P's of marketing. Price is your company's only opportunity to capture the value you create through your value proposition. Yet pricing has been a sorely neglected topic until recently. In fact, pricing in most industries has been neglected and usually relegated to some rule of thumb or cost plus pricing formula. Thankfully, this is beginning to change. For too long, companies have let their price be solely or largely predicated on some arbitrary rule of thumb, competitors' prices, or on an overhead plus desired net income calculation. These pricing mechanisms are relics of Karl Marx's labor theory of value and are completely obsolete in an intellectual capital, innovative, and dynamic economy. In the business of the future, effectiveness takes precedent over efficiency. A business does not exist to be efficient. It exists to create wealth for its customers. An obsessive compulsion to increase efficiency, doing things right, reduces the firm's effectiveness at doing the right things. The pursuit of efficiency has hindered most firms' ability to pursue opportunities, and hence the organization spends most of its time solving problems. One cannot grow a company and continuously cut costs and increase efficiency. It is not that efficiency is bad per se. It is that it has been pursued at the expense of nearly everything else. To add insult to injury, the efficiency measures that do exist in the modern organization tend to be lagging indicators that measure the efforts and activities, not leading indicators that measure results and define success in the same way the customer does. It is time for companies to develop testable hypotheses in the form of critical success factors and key performance indicators that measure the actual results of their output the same way customers do. All right, I think we get to the essence of what we're getting here. Cognitive dissonance. We could take over on this on another time, I think, but I believe I summed up where we wanted to go with the intellectual capital part of this and sum that up. So I hope everyone had a good experience here. Cognitive dissonance. I hope it wasn't too strong, because that's what we're taking a little journey in here. But this has been a really good, a very good text, and I hope that everyone else enjoyed it as much as I did to go over this again. These are principles and concepts, and this is a text I've pulled out of the archives or the archives over some time. And I'm not sure if Audit Them is still streaming right now, but if he is, it would be, I'm going to head over there and see if there's a nice musical outro for this experience we just had here. And I appreciate everyone for coming out tonight, and please make sure you do hit that like on your way out, so that we let everyone know, and the algorithm to get this word out so more people can start to adapt business and including the way they approach human capital, both the ones that work and the customers themselves. Have a business that's more self-aware about how the customers see them, and not just so much about an inward-looking efficiency and obsessive focus on just profit for themselves without creating value for their customers and their own human capital within. On that note, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.